The last major project Walt Disney personally approved before he died wasn't a theme park. It wasn't a movie. It was a massive ski resort, hidden in one of the most remote valleys in California, accessible only by a single road with 698 hairpin turns. He walked that valley himself. He pointed at the ridgelines and told his engineers exactly where the lifts would go. He signed off on a $35 million plan that would have built an entire alpine city from scratch. And then, on December 15th, 1966, Walt died. What happened to his project after that is a story Disney has spent 60 years making sure you never hear. This story's been buried for 60 years. And if you think it deserves to be told, a like goes a long way toward making sure it reaches the people who'd want to hear it. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. This channel doesn't run out of stories like this. For the last 2 years of his life, Walt Disney was quietly obsessed with a place most people have never heard of. A glacial valley tucked deep into California's Sierra Nevada mountains. So remote that the only road in had nearly 700 switchbacks and no guardrails. He didn't want to build a theme park there. He wanted to build something he'd never attempted before, a full-scale alpine resort city, hotels, ski lifts, restaurants, gondolas, a cog railway, an entire winter destination built from nothing in the middle of wilderness. He won a federal bid to do it. He had the blueprints drawn. He had $35 million committed. And then he died. And what came after was a 12-year war between the Walt Disney Company, the Sierra Club, and the United States government that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And by the end of this video, I'll show you the single legal decision this forgotten ski resort produced. One that had nothing to do with skiing, nothing to do with Disney, and yet changed the way every environmental lawsuit in America has been fought ever since. Because a place that was never built somehow rewrote American law. To understand how Walt Disney ended up fighting for a mountain valley in the middle of nowhere, you have to understand what was happening in America in the early 1960s. The ski industry was booming. Squaw Valley had just hosted the 1960 Winter Olympics, and overnight, winter tourism became big business. Resorts were popping up across the Rockies and to Sierra Nevada. Developers were scrambling for land, and the U.S. Forest Service, which controlled millions of acres of federal wilderness, was actively looking for private companies to build on it. They put out a call for proposals to develop a remote valley in the southern Sierra called Mineral King. 6 companies submitted bids. Walt Disney's was the biggest by far. He wasn't a newcomer to this. Walt had been visiting the Sierra Nevada for years. He was a skier, had been since the 1930s. He loved the mountains. And Mineral King had been on his radar since the late 1950s. It sat at roughly 7,800 feet, a glacially carved bowl surrounded by granite peaks topping 11,000. No commercial development, no hotels, no infrastructure, just wilderness, a handful of old mining cabins, and a road that most drivers were too scared to finish. Walt saw something there that nobody else did. In 1965, he submitted his proposal to the Forest Service. 14 ski lifts spread across multiple peaks, 10 restaurants, a chapel, a conference center, an ice skating rink, heated outdoor swimming pools. Enough hotel space for 2,500 overnight guests and capacity for 10,000 day visitors. The entire resort village would be car-free. Visitors would park below and ride a cog railway up into the valley. Underground utilities, pedestrian streets. The same level of obsessive design control that made Disneyland work applied to an entire mountain. The price tag, $35.3 million. In today's money, that's somewhere north of $340 million. Disney won the bid, and it wasn't even close. But here's the part that separates Mineral King from every other Disney project. This wasn't something Walt handed off to his executives and forgot about. He drove up that terrifying road himself. He stood on the valley floor and pointed at the ridgelines, told his Imagineers exactly where the lifts would go, exactly where the village would sit. exactly how the light would hit the slopes in winter. For a man who'd spent his entire career building fantasy versions of reality, Mineral King was the opposite. Real rock, real snow, real wilderness, no illusions. It was the most personal project Walt Disney ever approved. And he had less than 2 years left to live. But here's something most people never think about when they hear this story. That valley, Mineral King, sits at the end of a single narrow road, 25 miles long, 698 hairpin curves, no guardrails, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. It was originally cut as a mining trail in the 1870s, and by the 1960s, it hadn't been meaningfully improved. In winter, it was impassable. In summer, it took over an hour to drive. Walt's entire resort, the ski lifts, the hotels, the 10,000 daily visitors, depended on one thing that didn't exist yet. A brand new, all-weather highway punched straight through Sequoia National Park. And that highway was projected to cost more than the resort itself. The state of California would have to build it. The National Park Service would have to approve it. And here's the thing, they never fully did. Walt was betting everything on a road that might never get built. That road, and what it would have destroyed to build it, is the reason everything fell apart. But we'll come back to that. First, you need to see what Walt actually envisioned for this valley. Walt didn't hand Mineral King off to some junior design team. He gave it to DoD Enterprises, the same group that built Disneyland from the ground up. And what they came back with was unlike anything Disney had ever attempted. The plan was a European-style alpine village sitting on the valley floor. Chalet hotels with exposed timber framing, stone facades, pedestrian-only streets, no cars allowed anywhere in the resort. Visitors would park at a lower elevation and ride a custom-built cog railway up into the village. All utilities buried underground, every detail controlled, right down to the signage and the streetlights. It had the same DNA as Main Street, USA, except this wasn't fantasy. It was 8,000 feet up in the Sierra Nevada, surrounded by real granite and real snow. The ski operation alone was massive. 14 lifts spread across 3 mountain faces. Vandever, Rainbow Empire, with runs reaching above 11,000 feet. Over 50 trails, a bobsled course, night skiing under floodlights. And it wasn't just a winter destination. Disney planned summer operations too. Horseback riding, guided hikes, nature education programs. Year-round, 2.5 million visitors annually at full capacity. When the plans were public, it was everywhere. Life magazine, Look magazine. The Los Angeles Times ran the architectural renderings like they were announcing the moon landing. Disney had just stunned the world by secretly buying 27,000 acres of Florida swampland for Walt Disney World. Now he was going to conquer the mountains too. Nobody questioned whether it would happen. It felt inevitable. One of the ED designers who worked on the project later said something that stuck. Walt talked about Mineral King the way he talked about Disneyland in 1954, like it already existed and we just hadn't caught up yet. For a brief window in 1965 and 1966, Mineral King wasn't a dream. It was a countdown. Construction timelines were being drawn. Budgets were being finalized. The machine was moving. And then, without warning, the one person who could have made it happen was gone. On December 15, 1966, Walt Disney died of lung cancer. He was 65 years old. He'd won the Mineral King bid barely a year earlier. Overnight, the project lost the only person inside the company who truly cared about it. Roy Disney stepped in as head of the company, but Roy had one priority: finishing Walt Disney World in Florida. That was the flagship. That was where the money was going. A ski resort in a remote California valley that still didn't have a usable road? It slid down the list fast. And while Disney was looking the other way, someone else was paying very close attention. The Sierra Club had been watching Mineral King since the bid was announced. By 1967, they'd made a decision. This was the fight they were going to pick. Not because of the resort itself, but because of what it represented. The question was simple and enormous. Should the federal government be handing pristine public wilderness to private corporations for profit? Mineral King was the test case, and they had a pressure point: the road. Building a modern highway to the resort meant cutting straight through Sequoia National Park, blasting through old-growth forest, disrupting watersheds that fed rivers for hundreds of miles downstream, permanently altering one of the oldest protected landscapes in the United States. A park that had been set aside by Congress in 1890. The road wasn't a side issue, it was the entire vulnerability. In 1969, the Sierra Club filed a federal lawsuit to block the project. Their timing was surgical. That same year, Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, which for the first time required environmental impact assessments before major federal projects could move forward. The legal ground had shifted, and Disney was standing on the wrong side of it. The company fought back, but they were fighting without Walt, without full corporate conviction, and against a cultural wave that was building fast. Earth Day launched in April 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency was created that December. Across the country, Americans were waking up to the idea that wilderness had value beyond what you could build on top of it. Meanwhile, California's Highway Department had started preliminary surveys for the new road. The cost projections had ballooned far beyond original estimates. The environmental impact assessments, now legally required, confirmed what the Sierra Club had been saying all along. The road would cut through groves of giant sequoias. It would disrupt critical habitat for dozens of species. Public opposition wasn't just growing, it was turning hostile. The cracks weren't spreading slowly anymore. They were splitting wide open. Most people who've heard of Mineral King, and that's almost nobody, think it was killed by environmentalists. And that's partly true. But the real reason Disney lost wasn't the Sierra Club's passion. It was a legal technicality so obscure that even the lawyers almost missed it. The Sierra Club's original lawsuit was thrown out. Not because the court disagreed with them. Not because the judge sided with Disney. It was thrown out because the court ruled the Sierra Club hadn't proven that it, as an organization, was personally harmed by the project. They cared about the valley. They fought for the valley. But caring wasn't enough. An organization couldn't sue just because it believed something was wrong. And that ruling, that question of who has the legal right to stand in a courtroom and fight for a piece of land, went all the way to the highest court in the country, and it changed everything. In April 1972, the Supreme Court handed down its decision in Sierra Club v. Morton. The vote was 4-3 against the Sierra Club, but the ruling was narrow, razor narrow. The court didn't say the Sierra Club was wrong about Mineral King. They said the club hadn't shown that its own members would be directly, personally harmed by the resort's construction. It was a procedural loss, not a moral one. The Sierra Club knew exactly what to do. They refiled the lawsuit, this time with individual plaintiffs. Hikers, campers, naturalists. Real people who'd walked that valley, slept under those trees, and could stand in front of a judge and say this project would personally take something from them. The case was back on, stronger than before, and Disney was now staring down years, maybe a decade, of additional litigation with no guaranteed outcome. Through the mid-1970s, the company quietly stepped back. There was no dramatic announcement, no press conference, no internal memo saying it's over. Disney just stopped pushing. No new construction timelines were drawn up. No updated renderings were produced. The Mineral King blueprints sat in filing cabinets inside the Imagineering offices in Glendale, collecting dust, while every dollar and every executive's attention went to Walt Disney World's expansion and the early planning stages of Epcot. Mineral King wasn't canceled. It was abandoned in slow motion, and then came the kill shot. In 1978, Congress passed the National Parks and Recreation Act. It was a massive piece of legislation covering parks and protected areas across the country. Buried inside it, almost as a footnote, was a single provision that transferred Mineral King Valley out of the National Forest System and into Sequoia National Park. That one clause ended everything. National park land can't be commercially developed. Not by Disney, not by anyone, not ever. With one line buried in a 300-page bill, Mineral King was sealed off permanently. Disney's response? Nothing. No press release, no public statement, no protest, no legal challenge. The company let it die without a sound. Mineral King was quietly removed from Imagineering's project records. It disappeared from corporate timelines. It was never mentioned in official Disney histories. 60 years of company storytelling, books, documentaries, museum exhibits, and Mineral King doesn't appear in any of them. They didn't just abandon it, they erased it. And remember what I told you at the beginning about a forgotten ski resort that somehow rewrote American law? Here's what really happened. That Supreme Court case, Sierra Club v. Morton, became one of the most cited environmental law decisions in American history. It didn't just settle a fight over one valley. It established the modern legal framework for who has the right to sue to protect public land. Before Mineral King, an organization couldn't walk into a courtroom and fight for a forest just because it mattered to them. After Mineral King, they could, as long as their members could show a personal connection to the land. Every major environmental lawsuit filed in the United States since 1972, every fight over a national park, a protected watershed, an endangered habitat, traces part of its legal foundation back to a case about a ski resort that Walt Disney wanted to build in a valley most Americans have never heard of. A place that was never built changed the law forever. Mineral King Valley today is a protected wilderness area inside Sequoia National Park. The 25-mile road with 698 curves is still the only way in. It hasn't been widened. It hasn't been paved properly. It still takes over an hour to drive. There are no hotels at the end of it, no ski lifts, no restaurants, no gondolas. Just the valley, wildflower meadows in summer, granite walls on every side, and a small dirt parking lot where marmots chew through radiator hoses and brake lines if you don't wrap your engine in a tarp. It looks exactly the way it looked before Walt Disney ever set foot there. Walt spent a lifetime turning empty land into something extraordinary. Orange groves became Disneyland. Florida swampland became Walt Disney World. Mineral King was supposed to be his mountain. The one project that wasn't fantasy, that was built on real rock and real snow. Instead, it became the one place the Disney name couldn't reach. And the strange irony is that Walt's failed dream did more to protect American wilderness than anything he actually built. For the people who study Disney history, the real history, not the polished corporate version, Mineral King sits in a category by itself. It's not exactly a failure, it's an absence. A version of the Disney empire that only ever existed in blueprints, scale models, and the mind of a man who died before he could make it real. If this one got you, do me a favor, hit that like button before you leave. It's the single biggest thing you can do to help a video like this find the audience it's supposed to reach. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. There's a lot more where this came from. And Mineral King isn't the only Disney project that was erased. Inside Walt Disney World right now, surrounded by tens of millions of visitors every single year, there's an island that Disney closed, locked, and walked away from. It's been sitting there for over 25 years. No one's allowed on it. The buildings are collapsing. The exhibits are rotting. And what's happening to it is something Disney really doesn't want you to see. That video is on screen right now. And if you've ever driven that road to Mineral King, or if you've come across those old concept drawings somewhere online, I'd like to hear about it. Drop it in the comments.